Hey everyone, welcome to the Wilson Homestead. So it is the new year. Happy New Year to all of you. Hopefully this one is better than the past couple. But anyway, I thought that this would be a perfect time for me to show you everything that I put up from last year's garden. Now, I don't want to brag a whole lot about, like, oh gosh, look at all this food I put up. But this is the most food that I've ever put up, and I'm really proud of it. So I'm not bragging, but I am patting myself on the back a little bit. But before we get into that, I've got to show you what it looks like outside. I'm just going to show you what the garden looks like right now. Like, it is, I think, like about 23 degrees outside right now. That's our high for today. Tonight, I think we're getting down to 8 degrees, and then tomorrow night we're going to be at a lovely -3. There she is, put to bed for the winter. My poor garden. And you can see that all the tomatoes, all the vines, everything is still standing because I didn't have time to clean anything up. So I'm going to have a big job to do in the spring, but that's okay, as long as spring gets here fast. So I am working on some stuff in the kitchen. It's the last of the preserving that I have to do this year. I had put some stuff in the freezer, so I am going to go to the kitchen and show you what I'm working on, and then after that we will go over everything that I preserved this year. Now, I'm currently working on the last of my tomatoes. What I did in the summertime, when I didn't have time to deal with tomatoes and I had so many coming in that we couldn't eat fresh, I would take them and wash them and take the core out and then slice a little X on the bottom. And I would stick them in 1-gallon size freezer bags and put them in the freezer until now, when I have time to do something with them. I'm currently on holiday break from my job, and so this was the perfect time to get these tomatoes out, get them thawed. And once you thaw them out, they release a lot of water, like a lot of liquid. So what I do is I take that gallon bag that's full of these tomatoes in liquid, and I open it a little bit and I drain all of that water off of the tomatoes, and then I mill them. Now, before this year, I used this contraption, you know, just standard food mill with the little screen in it that catches all the seeds and all of the skins. Since I'm getting a little bit older, I have developed carpal tunnel, unfortunately, and this thing just about did me in. Cranking this and holding on to the handle was really hard for me to do. So I got this new food mill. This is a Weston, here's the book, Weston Tomato Press and Sauce Maker, and this thing is awesome. Now you can see, well, after you freeze the tomatoes and you get all of that excess water poured off of them, you end up with this nice thick sauce. I mean, look at that. Look how good that looks. Now, I did use some of this really thick, beautiful sauce to make salsa. I ended up with 7 pints of salsa, and the recipe that I use for salsa is Annie's salsa. You can just Google that and you will find it on the internet, pretty readily available to you. It's actually a recipe that has been tested and proven to be safe, but this is the best salsa recipe I have ever tried before. Now, usually when I make salsa, I go through the bother of blanching the fresh tomatoes, peeling the skin off, taking the seeds out all by hand, and then dicing the tomatoes. And this time I just used that nice, thick, rich sauce that I was getting out of the food mill. So it made it a lot easier. Now I might miss the little chunks of tomatoes, but there's a lot of other good veggies in there too, so maybe it won't be too bad. And if we like it this way, a smoother style salsa, I'll probably continue to do it this way just because it's not so laborious. Okay, back to my new food mill. So after I strained the excess liquid off of the frozen thawed tomatoes, I dumped the tomatoes in here, and you can see it has this little plunger type deal here, and you just turn this crank and that beautiful sauce just starts coming out, and all of the seeds and skins come out this end. Now I have realized that once you run this through one time, you can run it through 2 more times through the whole process and just get every last bit of goodness out of this stuff. But I mean, just look at this sauce. Yum! Oh, and if you're looking at this and like you have one of these already and you're thinking, hey, that idiot forgot to put the piece on the end to funnel the stuff out. Yeah, I did. I forgot to put that on. And I was almost all the way through these tomatoes before I realized it, so I thought, well, I'm not going to get this dirty now because it's already clean. And I have a feeling that this thing is going to be a nightmare to wash anyway, so that's one less part I have to clean, I guess. But you can see that it would be more advantageous to have this on here, because then I could scoot this bowl out a lot farther. Right now it's kind of right up next to the machine, and I'm kind of getting, you know, some seepage of a few seeds in here. So it would have been way better if I would have completely read the instructions, but I was so excited to try this machine out for the first time that it just slipped my mind. So anyway, that's where it goes, where it should go. I will do better next time. One of the first things that I preserved last year were peaches off of my peach tree. My peach tree did really well. It was completely loaded. It was actually too much fruit for the tree, I think, because it still hasn't completely recovered. I'm hoping that this spring it will. The branches got all saggy from being loaded with fruit, and I even thinned it. But it's still a fairly young tree. I think I planted it about, I'm going to say 5 to 6 years ago. So it's starting to get to the point where it should be fruiting regularly, but the branches just weren't strong enough to hold the massive amount of fruit that's on there. Because of my negligence, I should have thinned the fruit more. But like, that kind of hurts your soul to pick off all of these little fruits that you know could turn into a nice ripe peach that tastes delicious. But anyway, I will do a better job of that next year. I also did have a problem once the fruit started getting ripe. I had pincher bugs, you know, those little earwig things. They came and dug into the fruit, and then the bees came. Tons and tons of bees. And they were after this sweet fruit, and like, you know, like whenever you go to a theme park and you go to throw something away and all of these bees are at the garbage can, that's like what it reminded me of. I thought that maybe I was going to have to purchase a bee suit to pick the peaches. But anyway, I got through it, and after cutting away all of the holes that the insects dug into the fruit, I ended up with 6 quarts of peach pie filling. Now, With the pie filling, I either make a homemade peach pie with it. All you do is, you know, make 2 crusts, and you dump this in the middle of it, and you got a peach pie. You could even go to the freezer section of your grocery store and get the already made crust. That will make it really simple, because then you just put your crust down and put the pie filling in. Just a really quick, easy dessert. But what I usually use stuff like this for, it's called lazy cobbler. And you make like a batter, and you pour it in a 9x13 baking dish, and then you scoop this out on top of it, and then you bake it for about an hour, and it is delicious with vanilla ice cream. So most of these 6 quarts that I got will probably go into lazy cobbler. Next up, we have canned dill pickles. Look how pretty they are. And see, I've got the garlic from my garden, I have the dill from my garden, I have the cucumbers from my garden. So I am proud of these, but I didn't make as many as I needed to this year. I only canned 7 quarts. What the heck was I thinking? Well, here's the problem. I went overboard with making refrigerator pickles this year, because I discovered that I really liked them, and then I just went crazy. And let's see here, I have everything written down on a sheet right here, all of my counts. I made 10 pints of refrigerator pickles and 6 pints of bread and butter refrigerator pickles. That's a ridiculous amount, because I think you have to go through refrigerator pickles within a few months, and that was just too many. So next year, most of them are getting canned, because these will stay longer, and a lot of people said that they preferred the canned ones over the refrigerator pickles. So I will probably make, I think a reasonable amount of refrigerator pickles to make is like about 5 pints. So probably half I did. But I definitely have to step up my cucumber game this year in the garden, so that way I can put up more of these. I have a couple of uncles that really like these canned dill pickles, my Uncle Jeff and my Uncle Melvin. So they need dill pickles in their life. Grape jelly. My grapes did okay-ish this year. I only got 8 half pints of grape jelly, which I think it was two batches, which is pretty good. It could be better, but my grapes, they're a little bit in the shade, so I feel like if they were in full sun, they would produce more. And also, I don't really know how to prune grape vines. I suck at it, and I've tried and tried to watch the videos, and it's like you have to prune old canes, and like you've got to watch not to prune the canes from last year, because those will produce the grapes this year. Like, I think I can almost wrap my brain around it, but usually, and this is probably totally the wrong thing to do, but usually I have 2 grapevines that are growing over, it's actually an old monkey bar set from a school. Like, it got ripped out and they were just going to throw it away, and I'm like, hey, let me bring that junk home. I can grow grapes on that. But anyway, so like one year I'll cut one almost all the way back and then you're not going to get grapes if you do that from that vine. So I'll just do one side one year, and then I'll let it grow back up, and then, you know, maybe a couple years later I'll cut the other side back, and that's not really how you're supposed to do grapes. But New Year's resolution, learn how to treat your grapevines. But look how pretty that is. And it's so good. So much better than what you can buy at the store. So last year I planted a lot of beans. A lot of well, not green beans. They were multicolored beans, I guess you would say. But in the end, they all end up green or yellow. After, like, I grew Red Swan, which was a pretty pink colored bean. And after you cook it, it turns green. I grew, I think it was Royal Burgundy, which was a purple bean. And they turn green when you cook them. And then I had the wax beans, which, I don't know if you can tell, but there are a couple wax beans in there and they stay yellow. So they make things kind of pretty. I should have picked better jars, because some of them I had like half and half of the wax beans and the green beans, and they looked really pretty. But anyway, I can them in quarts and in pints, and here's the reason why. If I'm making dinner for my family, I'll use a quart of green beans, and if I just want a snack, a healthy snack, I can eat a whole pint by myself. So that's why I did that. And let me tell you, from my paper here, the amount that I canned, I did 74 pints and 40 quarts. That's a lot of beans. I was so sick of beans. But I really do like to have them. Like I said, it's a really easy snack. I can just eat these straight out of the jar. I don't need to put anything on them. Now I do put salt in these. I think it calls for a half of a teaspoon of salt in a pint and then a full teaspoon in the quart. But that's completely optional. You don't have to put salt in them, and it'll probably be healthier for you if you didn't add the salt, but I think they taste pretty good with the salt in them. Okay, so let's talk about peppers. I preserve my peppers in a couple different ways. I either freeze them or can them. This is cowboy candy, Wimpy cowboy candy to be specific. And the reason why this is called Wimpy cowboy candy is because last year in my garden I grew full Jew jalapenos, which look like a jalapeno, taste like a jalapeno, but they don't have the heat. And that's right up my alley. I don't like spicy food. Now my husband, he does prefer the hot jalapeno cowboy candy. So this year I think that I'm going to put probably about 4 to 6 regular jalapeno plants in the garden just for him, so I can make him some of this. Now let me look at my list here and see how much of this I canned. I did 15 half pints of this. Now, if you've never had this before, it kind of has like a sugary, vinegary syrup on it. It's basically candied jalapenos, and you can put it on your salad or on your sandwiches, but mostly the way that we eat this is we take crackers and then we put cream cheese on them, and then you put a couple of these on, and it's a really good appetizer. And also with the peppers, I grew a lot of bell peppers, and a lot of them I either diced and froze or sliced in strips and froze. So this way we can use it like for fajitas or sausages and things like that. And then these are easy just to get out of the freezer and put in a pot of soup or whatever. I like to use these diced ones for stuffed pepper soup. If you've never had that, make that recipe. It's so good, and it's so much easier than actually stuffing peppers, and it gives you the same flavor. I had 33 1-cup portions of the diced peppers, and then I had 10 of these 2-cup portions of the sliced peppers. That's a lot of peppers. Whenever I first started trying to grow peppers, I had such a tough time getting them to germinate, and I mean, I tried everything. I tried the paper towel method where you put the seeds in between damp paper towels and then you put them in a warm spot. I would put them on top of my cable box because that was a really warm spot, and you know, I had a little bit of luck with that, but the most luck that I've had is I bought one of those heat mats that you put under your trays, under your seed trays, and that has been a game changer for me. Almost every single pepper seed comes up that I plant, so I'm never looking back. Like, I found what works for me, and that's how I'm doing it from now on. And every year after that, I've had really good luck with my peppers. Okay, let's talk about onions now. I grew 3 different kinds of onions last year. I grew candy onions, I grew Zabroon shallots, and I grew Patterson onions. It was the first year that I grew Patterson onions, and I will tell you that I am very, very impressed by that variety. They store well, and they grew really well for me. Now the candy onions, they're a sweet onion, and they don't store for very long, you know, maybe a couple months at the most, just because they have a higher sugar content. But they were the first ones that had to come out of the garden because they got sick. So I pulled them out, you know, before too much damage was done. I let them dry on the porch, and then I diced them up and froze them. And then later in the season, I pulled the shallots and the Patterson onions. And a lot of them I diced up and froze them too. But I did make 4 braids. I did 2 braids of shallots and 2 braids of the Patterson onions, and they're still hanging in my basement and they're still usable. In fact, let me just get one really quick and show you one of the Patterson onions. I just brought this up from the basement a couple days ago, and they're still really firm, still really good to use. I am going to keep my eye on those shallots and onions that I have down there, because if they start looking like, you know, they're going bad, I'll go ahead and dice them up and put them in the freezer. Now, as for the diced onions that I did put in the freezer, I got 63 1-cup portions of onions in my freezer. And you can see, if you vacuum seal these, they don't take up a whole bunch of space. Actually, where I store these in my freezer, we have, you know, one of the stand-up freezers, and they have those little things on the door, and that's where all my onions and peppers go, is right in the door. And I can just grab these out whenever I'm making a recipe. Like, say for instance, I'm going to make chili, so I need to get 1 bag of the diced onions, 1 bag of the diced peppers, and so I get my pot out, I put a little bit of olive oil in the bottom of it, and then I just break these in half and dump them in while they're frozen. Same with the peppers, and you know, that saves you a lot of time without having to dice and clean your onions and peppers and all that. It's just so fast to have these ready whenever you're making meals, like even with like spaghetti or anything that you put onions in or peppers. It's so convenient to have these little packs in your freezer. Well, you're making clicky noises with your feet. You're so cute, huh? Do you want to hear me talk about tomatoes? Okay. Okay, let's talk tomatoes. I preserved my tomatoes in a couple different ways. You saw earlier in the video that I freeze them. That way I can deal with them later whenever I have time, you know, whenever it isn't in the middle of the harvest season, because they are a lot to deal with. Most of the recipes for tomatoes are hard. Like with the salsa, if I make it fresh, you have to get all of the seeds out of the tomato, and well, plus before that you have to blanch it and get the skin off, and then you cut it in half and take the seeds out, and then you dice it, And then you have to have diced peppers, and like it's a big job to make salsa. So I probably get around to making like 1 or 2 batches of salsa during the growing season and during the harvest season, because that's all that my time will allot. And then the rest of everything else that comes in just gets washed and cored, and then I score the bottom with an X, and it gets put into freezer bags and thrown in the freezer until later in the winter, whenever nothing else is going on. I can pull those out and thaw them and deal with them. So what I made out of those frozen tomatoes, I ended up with about 36 pounds that I had in the freezer. And with the salsa, like I said, I did do a batch or 2 earlier in the season, but the total for the year was 21.5 pints of salsa, which is Annie's salsa, my favorite recipe. I will never go back after I found this recipe. This is the best tasting one in my opinion. I know people have other opinions. That's okay. I'm just telling you what I use. You don't have to tell me in the comments below that I'm wrong. This is my favorite. You can have your own favorite. It's okay. And also, I ended up with 8.5 pints of tomato sauce. So, you know, I could make pizza sauce out of this, or spaghetti sauce, or I can put it in chili, which is nice. Now, if you're like me, you probably planted too many cherry tomatoes last year, and you just couldn't keep up with them. I mean, they're really good for fresh eating and all of that stuff, but then you're like, what do I do with all these cherry tomatoes? At some point you always get there, because you want to try all the colors, right? So you have to have that many plants. I mean, you just have to. But anyway, what I did with mine was, over the summer, I discovered the TikTok pasta recipe, and I thought, wow, I could freeze some cherry tomatoes and I can make that pasta all the time, in the wintertime, whatever. So you can see all my different colors of tomatoes that I have in there. And the pasta recipe is really easy, but also I've been doing a little research online of what else I can use these for. And I feel like I could pull them out of the freezer and roast them in the oven with like some onions and garlic and seasonings, and make a pretty good roasted tomato soup out of this too. So pasta isn't the only thing I could make out of this, which makes me happy because I have 10 bags of these, and each bag has about 1¼ pounds of cherry tomatoes in it. I had a pretty good carrot harvest this year. I ended up with 72 pounds of carrots. Isn't that crazy? Everybody that I told that to, they just get this glazed over look on their face, and they're like, what do you do with that many carrots? Well, let me tell you what I do with 72 pounds of carrots. I canned some, and I froze some. Now, frozen carrots are the way that I prefer to eat carrots. My husband likes the canned ones, so I did a little bit of both this year. I've never canned carrots before, so this was new to me. And I ended up with 26 pints of canned carrots, and I did 36 3-cup portions of frozen carrots. Now, in order to freeze these, all you have to do is peel them, slice them, blanch them. I can't remember how long I blanched these, but then you put them in ice water, and then I vacuum sealed them and put them in the freezer. And I like to use these for like beef stew, vegetable soup, glazed carrots, and these, I just don't like canned carrots, honestly. But I suppose that I could just throw these in vegetable soup. My husband, he'll just heat them up on the stove with some butter and salt and pepper and eat them. I don't enjoy them this way because they're so mushy, which is weird because I don't mind canned green beans, but when it comes to carrots, like, I just won't do it. I just don't like it. But he likes it, so that's why I can so many of those. Because this is a healthy snack for him too. Just like I am with the green beans, I'll just like pull out a pint of green beans and eat them. He'll do that with carrots. So healthy snacking is good snacking. Okay, let's talk garlic. I think I ended up with, I don't have an exact count of garlic heads. I don't know where my head was this year, but I pulled my garlic in July, and then I had it drying on my front porch, and then I started making dill pickles and salsa and all of that, and it requires garlic. And you know, anytime I needed some for a recipe, I would just go grab it off of the porch. So I don't know how much I actually had. I'm guessing between 65 and 70 cloves, or heads rather, not cloves. The individual things are cloves, but these are heads. I ended up with about 65 to 70. And so what I do is I let it out on the porch to dry for a while, and then I cut off the stalks, and then I store these in my basement in a brown paper bag. And as soon as I see signs of these getting a little soft while they're in the basement or starting to sprout, then I slice them and dehydrate them, and that's what this is. This is dehydrated garlic, which this is a good bit of it. I probably shouldn't grow so much garlic, but I can't help myself. I grew even more this year, if that makes sense. I can have a lot of garlic powder, but anyway, you take these cloves and you put them, I used to have a little coffee grinder, and you could put these in there and grind them up for garlic powder. But my little grinder has been commandeered. I'm going to have to get me a new one because they decided, oh man, my husband and daughter, they were like, oh yeah, this works really good for, like, they have horses, and they were like, we can grind up pills and put it in the horses' food. So there went my thing that I used to make garlic powder. But I'll just have to buy a new one, and I can turn all of this into homemade garlic powder and use it to season my dishes. But like I said, for now, I'm still using the fresh. This is in pretty good shape. I don't see any sprouting going on. All of the cloves are still pretty firm to the touch, so we're good to go for maybe another month or so. But then I'm going to have to keep a close eye on this, and then it will become this. Now, I did plant a few new varieties in the fall. Now with garlic, you plant it in the fall and then you harvest it the following. I usually harvest it around the 4th of July. So last fall I ordered 3 new different kinds of garlic, and I'm so excited about it. I know that I'm going to have too much garlic to deal with next year, so a lot of it will probably be turned to garlic powder. And also, if you grow a hardneck variety of garlic, they shoot up garlic scapes in the summer, and it looks like a little curlicue with like a flower bud on the end, and you can use those for cooking too. You can use them just like you do garlic to flavor your dishes, and I also dried some of that. Actually, let me go get it so you can see the garlic scapes. Here are my dried garlic scapes, and what I did, it's a kind of fiddly job, but I cut them off and then sliced them in half so that way they would dry faster. But you can make garlic powder out of this too. Like, this will be garlic scape powder. It has a little bit more mild of a flavor than if you would grind this, but it's still good either way. Some stuff I put up I didn't include in this video, so I'm just going to tell you about it. We were basically out of the zucchini bread. I did up recipes of zucchini bread while I had fresh zucchini coming in, and I put it in the freezer. I did a pineapple zucchini bread. I did a regular zucchini bread. I did a gingerbread zucchini bread, which was really good. Google that one. If you like gingerbread, you would love that one. And then I did a savory one, which was cheddar cheese and shallot zucchini. I made them into muffins, and they almost tasted like you know, you go to like Red Lobster and you get the Cheddar Bay biscuits. It was almost like that, except for I used the cooked shallots in it instead of the bay. So those were pretty tasty with some butter slathered on them. And also I did a few dried herbs. I had a lot of sage in my garden, as you know from my previous garden tours from last year. So I dried a lot of sage. I dried some thyme. I think that was about it. I also put quite a few things up that I didn't necessarily grow in my garden. We hunt on this homestead, so we did put up venison this year. We did turkey, wild turkey that we hunted. My husband went on a fishing trip this year, so we had a lot of salmon that we put up. And I told you earlier, I think, maybe I didn't mention it, but we don't have any apple trees right now that are producing on our property. Usually we get our apples from my husband's mom and dad. They have a tree. Well, that tree didn't produce this year. So we didn't have any apples, and I thought, oh no, I always make apple pie filling. You know, I love to have that for quick desserts because I'm in charge on Saturdays when we have Saturday dinner at my mom's house. I'm always in charge of desserts, and I like to have apple desserts. And so here I was without apples, and actually somebody very special to me gifted me a half a bushel of Granny Smith apples from a farmer's market in Virginia. And so I used that to make my apple pie filling this year, and I also made salted caramel apple butter. Now you can find that on the Ball Canning website. It's actually a pear butter, but I use the apples instead of pears. Either way, that recipe is good, and you can make it in the crock pot. It's super easy and it's really delicious. And so I think that about wraps up everything that I put up. I did end up canning some of the salmon that we had so we could make salmon patties and stuff like that, but that just about does it. So all in all, I think that was a pretty good gardening season last year. I couldn't have asked for more. Like I said, I do need to work on canning some more pickles next year, but other than that, I had a great gardening season last year, and I'm so proud of all the food that I got out of my garden. I mean, I don't have a very big garden either, and I was able to preserve that much food, and I am proud of it. I'm not bragging per se, but I am proud. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time here on the Wilson Homestead. Bye, guys. God, I'm rambling. Rambling. It's what I'm doing. I'm good at that. Cut. Okay, tomato. Sauce. Will never use another salsa recipe after... Uh-oh, my phone's going off. It must be a text about school. Anyway, I will never use any other recipe except for Annie's salsa. That's definitely the school because they send like 8 text messages at the same time and they're all out of order. Jeez, I should probably start this over again. Because it was great. It was so moist, and I shouldn't say moist, right? That's like a triggering word for people. Well, that's just about it, ain't it? I swear I was going somewhere with that. Lord have mercy.